In June 1986, Malcolm Hoenlein was elected Executive Vice Chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, which is the coordinating body on international and national concerns for 52 national Jewish organizations, of which B'nai B'rith is one. I first became aware of his name when I worked at the Jewish Community Relations Council in Boston in the early 1970s, and he already was one of the leading figures in the Soviet Jewry movement internationally. He also served as the executive director of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater New York. Malcolm has traveled throughout the world meeting with world leaders and Jewish communities, and I've been privileged to have watched him up close in many of these meetings. He has written and lectured across the U.S. and abroad on international relations, on Israel, Middle East issues, Soviet and world Jewry, terrorism, and the American Jewish community, and intergroup relations as well. He has been a mentor to many lay leaders and to many professionals in the Jewish community, and it is really a great privilege to introduce Malcolm Hoenlein.
So, first of all, I just want to say that B'nai B'rith is not one of the members of the Conference of Presidents. It is one of the key members of the Conference of Presidents, and largely due to the role that Dan, on an ongoing basis, has played, and all of the chairmen and presidents of B'nai B'rith, who have served as chairman, I think more from B'nai B'rith than any other one organization, as chairman of the Conference of Presidents over the years. So when Dan invited me, I always accept B'nai B'rith. It never says no to us and is always there at the forefront, as they are this week, in the meetings we're having with world leaders, with foreign ministers and prime ministers, and wanna-be prime ministers and should not be prime ministers. We wish when they weren't prime ministers or foreign ministers. It's really a test of tolerance, I would say, for Hannah, for us this week. I think we passed the tolerance test, that you should give us all medals for keeping America's reputation safe by not saying all the things we would like to say and should have said in response to some of the things that we heard. This is not really an anniversary to celebrate. And at best, it's a commemoration or a recollection, but Durban 1 was not something that we can ever celebrate. What we can do is to learn the lessons of Durban 1. This is not Durban 3. Susan Rice told us we should not call it Durban 3 because it's not a conference, it's an event. And it's an event that is meant to mark what happened 10 years ago. As Erwin properly pointed out, Durban 1 was the blueprint for all that we have seen over the past decade. The worldwide campaign of delegitimization finds its roots in Durban 1. We saw laid out there exactly the strategy, although many didn't recognize it. But they told us exactly what they were going to do and how they were going to do it. We were caught up in the moment in the horrific display and the confrontations that took place there, perhaps not able to see as clearly as they did what was to ensue. I believe that today, the most serious issue we face, other than Iran perhaps, is the delegitimization of Israel and the Jewish people. Because it's not just about Israel. Israel is rightly described as the corporate entity. It's the corporate Jew, or as Bernard Lewis said, it's the collective Jew who is under the gun. But it's not still, 70 years after the Shoah, politically correct to say I hate Jews, but you can't say I hate Israel or I hate Zionists. What we saw at Durban 1, and when we recall it and think about what we were told there and the message that they were given, it should have been obvious, or more obvious, about what was going to happen. But it set the stage. And this campaign of global delegitimization is evident in every country and in every sector of society. What we saw launched there is today given expression in economic, in cultural, in entertainment, in legal, in political, in philosophical, and certainly in academic spheres. We see the manifestations of BDS, Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement, that then were only initials, not something that we all thought could be implemented in the 21st century or the end of the 20th century. And yet we see it today becoming more and more acceptable. And all that we are witnessing this week at the United Nations, the unilateral Declaration of Independence, which the United States has taken the lead in fighting and fighting effectively, is part of the delegitimization campaign. It is an outgrowth, but it is part of it, because it says you have to negotiate with every other country except the Jewish country. It says that there is one country that doesn't meet the standards, that doesn't have to be treated, that doesn't have to be accepted as even the smallest island of 50,000 people in the Pacific has to be accepted. This UDI movement, this effort at a unilateral declaration, is meant to isolate Israel. It's not meant to elevate the status of the Palestinian people, because they gain nothing from the fulfillment of UDI. Quite the opposite. They will pay the price for UDI. That's why the president said what he said about it being a diversion, and other world leaders, Prime Minister Harper, talked about the negative impact of the unilateral declaration. Other true leaders of democracies have warned, including Fayyad, the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority. But what drives it is not because it's a benefit to the Palestinian people. In part, it's Abbas's legacy and his desire just to establish his own, the legacy that he will leave behind. But more than that, it is part of the campaign to say that the Jewish state, i.e. the Jewish people, the representation of the Jewish people, does not have the standing of every other country in the world. It's not judged by the same standard. In the Human Rights Council, in the international courts, in every way, it's not held to the same legal standards. And therefore, we have the campaign of lawfare being manifested in so many ways. England this week, as you know, this past week, changed the law, the rules on universal jurisdiction, which had enabled people to bring charges against Israelis even though they had no relationship or involvement in the particular case or with the individual involved. Because they recognized finally that this distortion undermines the principle of universal jurisdiction. Lawfare undermines the legitimate expression of law and utilization of law, and especially international law. And we are seeing how it spreads from country to country. We work with people in England, in France, in Spain, in Austria, who are from the front line of this battle. But increasingly, we are seeing it here now. And you will see many more lawsuits, and why we established the Lawfare Project, and the immense response from lawyers across the country who see it in ways that we often don't, and find the expressions that we often don't. And the goal of this campaign is to intimidate us. It's to intimidate the friends of Israel, the supporters of Israel. It is to silence us. It is to say that you don't have the rights of every other American to speak out, to make your voices heard. It's to try and isolate us and say that and embarrass us when we speak out for Israel. And how many of you know students and people on campuses and elsewhere who do not speak out anymore because they're afraid on their campuses to do it? I can't tell you how many countless numbers who approach us, and I ask them, well, do you answer it? They say, no, I'm afraid. But I can tell you that it's not just students on campuses. It's faculty on campus. And it's not just faculty on campus, it's people in every sphere who do not respond. When we see the kind of charges in the media, when Ahmadinejad can be interviewed with two sections that by a major network, in a puff piece, in a whitewash, in a disgraceful display that undermines journalism. What is the message to every dictator if here the worst violator of human rights in the world is extolled in the way and treated in the way that he is? I mean, it was nauseating to watch it. When people on national television can call us a fifth column and there are no consequences, when you hear the kind of charges that are being made repeatedly, when textbooks can be used from Harvard to University of California like Walt and Mearsheimer's that has sold 1 million copies, a complete falsification of history and of fact, and yet accepted on the campuses because it's all part of delegitimization. And it can be manifested in so many ways. And many people say to me, yeah, but I don't see it. It's because we're not aware, we're not conscious of it. It's all around us. I tell them it's like a tumor that grows quietly. By the time you discover it, it's too late. For me, the model was Great Britain, where we saw first implemented the outgrowths of Durban 1, where you had what I called the poisoning of the elites, where it starts in the elites of society and then works its way down. When academia, when on the campuses and universities, when intellectuals and others, the creative classes, engaged in this vile anti-Israel and often borderline anti-Semitic activity, it ultimately finds its way in influencing public opinion and shaping the views, and especially of the next generation who come off the campuses having been fed this by the authority figures that they encounter. Great Britain was the model for the United States. And if you look at a very important document published by 3 non-Jewish members of the House of Commons, McShane, Dunn, and I forgot the third, Erwin, maybe you remember. And Dunn, Mann and Dunn, right. See, I knew they would know, they're smart people. Read that document if you want to see the blueprint for America. Because it's not the French example where it comes from anti-Semitism from the bottom up. It's from the top down. And we are seeing the same thing here on campuses across the United States, in intellectual circles, in virtually every sector. We sent people from Hollywood to Israel. And we just had a group that came back, the stars of Twilight and Avatar and House MD and others. And it's amazing to hear their perceptions and what they had heard in Hollywood, what Israel was about, what Israel did, the horrible crimes, the things that they had anticipated seeing. And were shocked when they found a democratic society where blacks and Arabs and others were there, integrated, working together. I mean, the message of it, to see how pervasive it is. Intelligent people, your neighbors, everybody's neighbors, buys into it. And you know what? I don't blame those who purvey these messages. I blame us. It's because we raise the bar on what we're prepared to tolerate. And it's not because it comes down in one sudden swoop. That everybody would react to. If somebody does something terrible, we all will react and we get into the streets. But when it's an erosionary process, when it's one layer after another attack, and we say, okay, we can live with it. You know, the Jews in Egypt, it says, were not redeemed until they finally said, no more. It says that God took us out mitachat siblot Mitzrayim, from under the oppression of Egypt, and it said, no, it means sablanut, patience. That as long as the Jews said, we can take it, more bricks, less straw, more whippings, less whippings, they said we could take it. It was only when they said no more, we're not going to take it anymore. God said, now you're ready to be redeemed. Because you have to be ready first, freed psychologically, before you can be freed physically. The Jews in Germany, unfortunately, in the 30s, when they were cut off from education, they said, how much worse can it get? And they were cut off from commerce when they were cut off and cut off and cut off. And they kept saying, it can't get to the ultimate. It can't be much worse. And you adjust to it. As horrific as the conditions were, they adjust. And this is true throughout history, and it's human nature. It's not just true of the Jewish community. Until one day we look back and say, how did this happen? Where did it come from? The answer is we're witnessing it. And we better make ourselves a hell of a lot more aware and pay attention to it and understand. Because it's we who raise the bar. It's we who allow it to happen. By our tolerance, by our unwillingness to stand up and to say, no more. We're not going to let you say these horrific things. If there's legitimate criticism of Israel, absolutely. You're not an anti-Semite because you differ with a policy or criticism of Israel, or else 99% of Israelis would be anti-Semites. This is not criticism of Israel. This is not about settlements. It's not about 67. It's about 47. It's about Israel's right to exist. It's the right of the Jewish people to have national determination, self-determination, and national expression. That's the issue. And when we allow them to get away with it, they will incrementally increase it because each time it provides the base for the next level and the next level. Martin Luther King once said, we will not be judged by the attacks of our enemies, but by the silence of our friends. We have to start saying, where are our friends? The United States stood up in the United Nations. How many countries have now rallied to say, we understand why you oppose UDI? Because it's bad for the Palestinians, it's bad for Israel, it's bad for peace, it's bad for everybody. But it's a slander at the same time. Who's willing to stand up in the Human Rights Council and say no more? We're not going to let 80% of the country-specific resolutions about Israel continue. We're not going to allow them to continue to slander and have Iran and Syria and China sit in judgment of the human rights policies of Israel. And the truth is, again, it's not that it just hurts Israel. It undermines the real pursuit of human rights. It diverts us from the real attention that we ought to be given to those who are the blatant violators of the rights of people. We adopted a strategy early on, B'nai B'rith part of it, but all of 60 organizations came together, and for months we met about what to do about Durban 3. And the decision we made was to downplay it, to diminish it. And as Ambassador Rice said to me, why would people hold demonstrations if you want to draw attention away from it, not to it? And if you notice, there's hardly any press coverage about the Durban conference. And they have structured it so it'll be a one-day conference with an opening session and a closing session, and in between, while there are all the spokesmen, and I'm sure the great advocates of human rights, I'm sure Ahmadinejad and Chavez and all of them will be there, they each get 3 minutes. But they scheduled Ahmadinejad against it, and specifically to draw attention away, knowing that he would get the attention. So here, the United States, even the UN and Israel, everybody agreed, play it down. Why should we become the vehicle for their PR? Why should we elevate this rather than denigrate it and say there's nothing to celebrate? And I believe that the strategy was right, and the fact that we were able to work together with our government and with other governments in bringing that about was very important. And it's a message to us, again, that you have to know when to hold them and when to fold them. You have to know when you have to be out on the front line and when not. We don't know yet what the outcome on the UDI debate will be. We don't know what he will do. I do not believe that we will see a big event this week. I think at most we'll see the letter, and as I said for many months, I think it will not be the kind of tsunami that people have been predicting, because it doesn't serve their interest, and because they don't want to lose U.S. aid. And I think the members of Congress deserve a lot of praise, because them putting down the marker, I think, changed this debate a great deal. And when you have a unanimous vote in the Senate and 406 to 7 in the House, that's a pretty strong message. So I think that right now, we are at a very important watershed period. And this is not an issue about months or years. I don't even think it's an issue for decades. I think this is an issue for generations. That the decisions we make and the actions we take in regard to this campaign of delegitimization will be judged by our grandchildren and their grandchildren, because they are the ones who will pay the ultimate price for it. That the real impact of delegitimization is not being felt by us now. It's going to be felt in the future. Because as this becomes accepted, those who donate, buy trees in Israel, give to the UJA, anything, will be subject to arrest under, quote, universal jurisdiction, because we support a terrorist entity. There are ramifications that we can't even consider at this point. But can any of us imagine what a world without Israel would be for us, for the world? What would the Middle East be today? How many Arab countries say to us now, hey, listen, we want a strong Israel? Guys that don't have diplomatic relations, but know how important Israel is, especially at the enemy that they're all worried about. So I really applaud B'nai B'rith for doing this, to give us a chance to look back in order to look forward. Churchill once said, the further back you look, the further ahead you will see. It's why Judaism imposes upon us the need to look at history differently than other people. We don't read history, we don't study history, we experience history. And we experience it because we know the past is about the future. That we learn the lessons of the past. It's not because we dwell on the tsaras and the tragedies of the past. It's that we learn the lessons to spare future generations those trials and tribulations. That's our responsibility today.